First up, we're going to dive into a new announcement from Meta, the parent company of Facebook, because they just announced what they are calling the segment anything model, or SAM for short. This is a model that can essentially identify objects in an image. So even when it hasn't been trained on a specific object it's seeing, this SAM is able to actually identify what the object is and the constituent pieces of it. So this is really important. We're not going to get super technical, but it's extremely important because this process of identifying objects in images is called something called segmentation. So hence that name, segment anything. This matters even if you're not, a data scientist, engineer, or technical type, because segmentation has to be done in order for computer vision systems to do what they do. Up until now, though, doing that took a ton of time and money and custom training. But now using something like SAM, you can simply click on objects to segment all the pieces of them and understand what's in the image. You can even just write a text prompt to tell the model what objects you'd like to identify. So an example they gave was just type in cat and it'll identify all the cats in a photo. Now, historically, doing that has taken a lot more time and energy and money to do. Now, this has some wide ranging applications across different industries. So, Meta gives some examples of what this model might be able to do in the near future. So, for instance, you could see it incorporated into augmented reality glasses. So, using AR glasses, something like SAM could instantly identify objects that you're looking at and prompt you with reminders and instructions related to them. For marketing and business specifically, there was an article in Gizmodo that called the demo of SAM a quote, Photoshop magic wand tool on steroids. One of the reporters at Gizmodo actually used it to do really sophisticated image editing on the fly with ease just by pointing and clicking to remove and adjust an image. Now, that's just kind of scratching the surface here because right now the model is only available for non-commercial testing. But given the use cases, you can start to see there are many, many possible ways we might start seeing this really advanced computer vision model be incorporated into Meta's platforms as a creative aid. So, Paul, when you saw this announcement, what were your initial thoughts here?
A few things come to mind. One, I think a lot of people don't realize Meta has a major AI research lab. People who aren't in the AI space sometimes forget that or didn't know that Meta is a major player in this space, led by Jan LeCun, a Turing Award winning AI researcher and one of kind of the fathers of modern AI. And so I think it's a good reminder. Any regular listeners to our show would recall us maybe talking about Cicero from Meta AI, which is a really cool kind of research paper and model. So I think one is just a reminder that Meta is doing some really interesting things in AI. Um, Two, I think the first thing that jumped to me is the openness of this. So that is again something that was key to Jan LeCun going to with Facebook back in like 2013 or whenever it started the Facebook AI Research Lab. Um, he wanted to work for an organization that adhered to open research principles that shared everything they were creating. Now, again, if you're a regular listener paying attention to the space, there is a battle right now between open and closed. And some of the more traditionally open labs like OpenAI are becoming very closed. And Jan LeCun is continuing to push for the openness and the sharing of this. So, with this openness, it appears that the major breakthroughs here are one, the foundational model. So, the ability for people to build on top of this model. And two, the openness of the data set. So, they said specifically the segmentation data needed to train such a model is not readily available online or elsewhere, unlike images, videos, and text, which are abundant on the internet. So if we think about how a language model like GPT-4 learns, it just goes and consumes a bunch of text data. Think about Stable Diffusion or Mid Journey, they go and consume a bunch of images. If you think about the need to be able to recognize objects with images, that doesn't exist. And so they're basically building this data set and making it available. So to me, the big takeaway is this could likely lead to an explosion in terms of computer vision applications in companies. So people who previously could not build this kind of stuff because it required tons of expertise and data they didn't have, they're making it open to be able to access this stuff and build on it. Whether, you can envision advertising applications, brand monitoring applications, product development. Like, there's all these ways you could probably think about using this technology. But prior to this, it was going to be a lot harder to build stuff. And so it seems like this is a really important moment for people who want to build around objects and segmentation. And I know they say that they can't currently extract from video. It can extract from stills of videos, but it can't extract from like the moving video itself. But the way they word it sure makes it sound like this can be applied to video over time, like the same kind of approach will be able to be applied to extracting objects and masking them within videos. So it just seems like it's going to open a whole new realm of innovation. And anytime that some major paper or model comes out of Meta, it's usually worth paying attention to as sort of a prelude of other things that might come from it.
Gotcha. Yeah, it seems like it's about to be a very, very exciting time in computer vision.
Mm.
So, what is not as exciting for some of the AI companies out there, uh, notably OpenAI, are regulatory woes. So, we talked last week about OpenAI's problems in Italy. Namely, Italy put into effect a full ban on ChatGPT in the country. That's unfortunately for OpenAI just the beginning. A new article from Wired breaks down why and how Italy's ban could actually spur wider regulatory action across the European Union and actually could call into question the overall legality of AI tools in the EU as a whole. Now, when banning ChatGPT, Italy's data regulator ended up citing several major problems they had with the tool. But fundamentally, their reasoning for the ban hinged on our good friend GDPR, the European Union's wide ranging general data protection regulation privacy law. Under GDPR, there are 6 ways you can legally collect data from EU citizens, of which are 400 million of them. These range from things like someone giving you permission to use their data to having data collection be part of a legal contract that you enter into with someone. So there's these 6 ways that you're legally allowed to get someone's data. Now, here's the issue. OpenAI has collected personal data from EU citizens to train ChatGPT and its underlying models. So Wired actually interviewed several regulatory experts who said, look, there's only 2 ways that OpenAI could have gotten this data legally under EU laws as they are today. The first would be if they had gotten consent from each user that they trained the model on, which we know they did not. The second would be arguing they have, quote, legitimate interests to use each user's data in training their models. Now, the experts cited say that that second argument is going to be extremely difficult for OpenAI to prove to EU regulators. And Wired actually interviewed Italy's data regulator who created the ban, and they said already this type of defense is, quote, inadequate. So this really matters outside of Italy because all EU countries are bound by GDPR. And the article has cited that data regulators in France, Germany, and Ireland have already gotten in touch with Italy's regulator to get more info on what they did and their findings. Norway's data protection director even said that if a model is built on data unlawfully collected, it raises questions about whether anyone can even use the tools legally that were built on top of those models. So this isn't just an open AI problem anymore. Plenty of other major AI companies likely have trained models in ways that could be problematic. So first up, Paul, I want to ask, do you expect to see additional regulatory action coming from actions like that are the ones happening in the EU?
I'm no expert in European law and GDPR in particular, but it sure sounds like this is a mounting problem in Europe. And the thing we've always been guided on previously was to look at, the AI Act in Europe, the efforts to build that, look at GDPR, and just assume those same level of regulations, restrictions would be arriving in the US, shortly after they are enacted in Europe. And so you start to wonder, what is the fallout to this? So it does certainly appear that there is a domino effect starting to happen where Italy comes first and then others potentially follow. So I think you have to be paying close attention to that. Now, obviously, we're talking about OpenAI here. They're not the only player. It's not the only language model company. It's not the only application that you can use. So I immediately start thinking about, well, what's the impact of the other applications in the ecosystem that are built on top of these language models? And again, not just GPT-4 and GPT-3 and OpenAI's models. And so if you're a user of one of these AI writing tools that's using these technologies and you're in Europe, is this going to immediately affect you in the near term? So that's one thought I have, is just it seems like it's a domino effect, and it seems like it could go beyond just OpenAI into other areas. You then start wondering about the same issues related to any generative AI technology in Europe, and then again, kind of coming to the US, whether it's images or videos or anywhere where there's you call into question the training data, basically. So I think, as we've said before, the big question is there's a lot of uncertainty about this. And so especially if you're a bigger enterprise where you can't take like big risks on this stuff, if you're a small business or a startup, you're probably way more willing to, roll the dice and take some chances on these things and see how it plays out. But if you're a bigger enterprise, a CIO, CEO, or, somewhere that's making recommendations to the C-suite about the integration of these technologies, I think our whole position here is you got to at least be paying attention. Um, and again, like we've talked about, like at some point we'll probably need to start bringing in some guests. Like you and I riffing on some of this stuff is helpful to a point for people to surface it for them. When we start getting into these really technical issues and legal issues, it's not our domain to provide guidance to people about what you should do about this. It's our feeling that giving you a point of view that you need to be thinking about this and talking to the right people is kind of our role here. And so I feel like this, especially for our European listeners, it's right at your doorstep. Like you got to be paying attention now. For the US, the question becomes, is this something that we should be thinking about? Like Sam Altman, we know, has been meeting in Washington with legislators, and is part of the concern here that they have concerns around the training data. Now, there's some other thoughts I have around the US and whether or not they would follow suit. My instinct is they're not going to. Again, this is totally no inside sources, but the US has every motivation in the world for US based companies to be leading the world in the development of these technologies. And so there's very minimal reward to the US government to slow down this innovation. Now, they want it to be done safely, but they also want access to this level of technology. And we know just this past week, President Biden was convening his science and technology group to talk about artificial intelligence. So this is in the Oval Office stuff. Like they are actively looking at AI. And so I think there's all these kind of competing interests around whether or not this is good or bad, and whether or not we should be slowing this stuff down, going back to the conversation last week about the Future of Life Institute letter. And I think my general takeaway in the US, at least, is there's no real slowing this down. I think it's full speed ahead for this stuff. I think there are legal issues around the training data. I think they'll be resolved in somehow, through court cases, through settlements, through something. But it's certainly worth keeping an eye on. And again, if you're in Europe, real close eye on, because you may not have access not only to ChatGPT, but all other generative AI technologies if this goes through.